You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome. Today we are extremely fortunate to have with us Dr. Daniel Hume. He is the Chief AI Officer at the world's largest advertising agency, WPP. And he's also, even more importantly, the founder and CEO of Satalia, a company which leverages machine learning for optimization use cases for, amongst other things, optimizing the routes for some of the most well-known grocery chains. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I would love to start with the thing that everybody wants to know, which is the success stories. What amazing things have you seen that people are doing, especially in the advertising and communications space, with artificial intelligence?
I know this is a common phrase, but artificial intelligence has been around for a long time. I've been involved in AI for 25 years. And I guess there are different types of algorithms that people call AI. Some algorithms are good at machine learning, extracting insights from data. Some algorithms are good at complex decision making. Now we have a family of algorithms called generative AI that is really good at creating content, and whether it be imagery or text or soon video, sound. So these technologies have and are continuing to be applied to the marketing supply chain. Generative AI has unlocked a new capability that actually will accelerate the transformation of marketing. So, these large language models are excellent at creating content. And we're in the business of creating content, specifically brand-specific, production-grade, differentiated content, ads that excite people and resonate. And, there's a whole family of algorithms or generative AI technologies that allow us to do that now at scale. We call them brand brains. Brains are able to create brand-specific content. What large language models have also been able to do is unlock the capability of recreating how people think and feel about content. And then this is a really important concept. We can create any content now pretty much that we want, but now we have the ability to recreate how people think and feel about it. And what we call these audience brains. And we can now tap into kind of what goes on in people's minds and bodies. We can use those signals to create better content, but more accurately predict activation. Predicting activation isn't large language models, it's machine learning, it's data science, and particularly it's explainable algorithms. So if I show you an ad with a black cat, I can predict the clicks, likes, and sales. But what machine learning can do is it can say, Daniel, if you change that from a black cat to a ginger cat, you're going to get more clicks, likes, and sales because that person likes Garfield. It's a terrible example, but the point is machine learning can surface insights about the world in ways that generative AI and other technologies can't. And I guess now we can more accurately predict activation, so clicks, likes, and sales. We can now figure out how do we put that content across channels to maximize return on investment. And that is optimization. If you're old enough, it used to be called operations research. But the point here is that traditionally we'd use machine learning to predict activation. We would use optimization to allocate that across channels. The bottleneck actually was how do you create content and how do you create content that resonates with people? We can do that now super quickly. So AI is supercharging the ability and speed for us to create better content more quickly. One of the next big challenges, how do we identify moments that are going on around the world, which is probably machine learning, and even how could we use AI to enhance or accelerate the creative process. So ultimately, completely transforming media marketing communications, and WPP, I think, are at the forefront of it.
Excellent. So, it sounds like there are three things there. One of them is just accelerating the creation of content. We can now do this at scale faster and presumably more cheaply. The second aspect of this was that, we can create better content, in part because the models themselves are very well adapted to it. We can tune them towards it. But it sounds like almost that we can create almost like virtual test panels more quickly. We can create those audiences and test these with a virtual audience, the LLM acting as a responder for this in a way that it just took much longer previously. And lastly, it sounds like it's also just the speed at which we can go in and assess what's happening around the world and recognize what we need to respond to. So theoretically, if there was a particular customer segment that was having a bad issue, that there was something that was going on that our brand was present in and associated with, previously we just wouldn't get much of a heads up about it because it's so difficult to go in and monitor all of those channels everywhere. But now with these tools, it enables us to analyze unstructured data, written text, voice, language, so we can identify those things that we need to and then create that content to respond to it a lot faster. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, there is also the ability to explore the creative landscape. I think there's a big question about whether AI can be creative, and we believe that it can, and it can actually help enhance, accelerate that creative process. I should also say that, our ability now to create content at scale more rapidly, more effectively, also increases our responsibility. Marketing, media, communications have created responsible, safe content for many, many years. And our ability to do that now at scale means that we need to also scale up our ability to do that. So one of the things that we're doing in the BBP is we're creating brains that represent every corner of society: political parties, newspapers, minority groups, cultures, even things like ad compliance claims, sustainability claims, food compliance, claims. So when we're creating content across our supply chain, we can now show it to these sort of council of representatives, so these AIs, to make sure that we're not creating any content that's triggering any communities or causing any harm or breaking any laws. So actually, AI can help us create safer, more responsible content.
So there's a way in which to almost AI could make us be a little bit more inclusive, because whereas in normal situations there's a limit to how many different viewpoints we can take into account, here in theory the sky's the limit. We can replicate any viewpoint or a sort of personality. Obviously there are concerns there in terms of you still have to do that well. There's still all things that can go wrong there, but the opportunity to go in and ensure that the content isn't harmful for any one of these audiences is there in a way that really was very difficult to do before.
Absolutely. I mean, it's still very, very difficult. Getting the data and building these brains that represent an audience is complex, but it's really exciting. And in some respects, AI has been cyclic over the past 70 years. It used to be very simple brains, perceptrons, and then it became what are called agent-based systems, multi-agent systems, where you had multiple brains all coordinating or collaborating. And then we had brains again, and then multi-agent systems. Now we have brains, so these large language models. And of course, the next generation is multi-agent systems. And the power of a multi-agent system is having these different agents that have different expertise, different perspectives, so diverse perspectives, all collaborating around a particular problem, which again is very, very exciting, very, very powerful.
Well, going to that collaboration point, I was curious your thoughts on to what degree is this augmentative when it comes to the people involved versus that this is automation? Is it primarily the case that when it comes to creating content, we're still talking about situations where humans are very involved in going in and providing the context, shaping the message, and evaluating the output of it, and going and guiding that refinement process? Or similarly, going in and when looking at one of these panels, leveraging also human inputs in addition to these AI inputs, and that process of assessing, collating, validating this is still very much human oriented? Or is this one where this is getting more and more automated, and actually sometimes we people are very biased and we have our own views and we're not always terribly data driven, and sometimes we could just get in the way? I'm imagining we're still very much on the former side, that this is really, and for the foreseeable future, very much augmentative. But are we already seeing instances where no, actually we can fully automate some of these things?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is it depends. There's plenty of material books out there that demonstrate humans' fallibilities or biases. Daniel Kahneman wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, and Noise, and Dan Ariely has written Predictably Irrational. So, humans have logical fallacies. We have biases that mean that we don't necessarily make good decisions. That said, whenever we've been building AI solutions over the past now almost 2 decades, we typically always have humans in the loop. And the reason why we have humans in the loop is because there's some things that AIs are good at and confident at being able to do better than a human being, and there's some things that they're not. And the art is, how do you make sure you have the human in the loop, make sure that you're mitigating against some of the risks of the AI going wrong, or helping the AI learn from its mistakes. And then there's actually a very, very nice definition of AI that I guess I've built an entire career around over the past 20 years. So I know that there's a popular definition of AI because of generative AI, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. And that's obviously a very recent thing. We've managed to get large language models and generative AI to get things to do things that computers can do. But it's a very elegant definition of AI that I think comes from a definition of intelligence. So instead of using human beings as the definition of intelligence, it's goal-directed adaptive behavior. So it's a really beautiful definition. So goal-directed in the sense you're trying to route your vehicles to maximize deliveries, or spend your marketing money to maximize return on impact and return on investment. The behavior is how quickly we can answer that question and how well we can answer that question. But the key word in that definition is adaptive, goal-directed adaptive behavior. The faster you can make decisions, the faster you can learn from whether those decisions are good or bad, the more intelligent you are. And the fact is there are some things that humans are not good at. We're not good at solving problems beyond 7. We're not good at finding patterns in more than 4 dimensions. Computers can find patterns in thousands of dimensions. They can solve problems with thousands of moving parts. And maybe just to kind of geek out for a second, there's an example that I always use, which is if you have 5 staff members that you need to allocate to 5 jobs, there are 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 possible solutions, 5 factorial solutions. If I've got 15 people allocate to 15 jobs, there are now 1 trillion possible solutions. If you have 60 people that allocate to 60 jobs, there are more possible solutions than there are atoms in the universe. And the point here is that using human beings to solve those decision-making problems is a waste of time. You want to be using algorithms. You want to be using AI to do that. And then you want to be using the human being in the loop to make sure that it's doing it in the most effective way.
Yes, I mean, up until, about 5 years ago, I constantly had talk tracks where pointing to AI and machine learning as having superhuman capabilities, but also subhuman failings. And arguably, the whole reason why these technologies are valuable is precisely because they do not think like humans. We already have good things that think like humans, and they're called humans. And we have a lot of things that are optimized for them. The art of the possible is in all of the things that it would do that would do better than we do. So I like that definition of AI. Hopefully, it moves us away from the automatic tendency to gear our use cases towards things that we're already doing and have sometimes suboptimal solutions for, but have optimized for already. I'm curious there because you're talking a lot about you're mentioning what's effectively an optimization use case, and when I think about the AI stories in the media going back about 10 years ago, they were things like DeepMind winning at chess, or AlphaGo winning at Go. And those, well, one, they're complete information games. And so there's a limited set of complete information games that we have out there. But they are also fundamentally optimization use cases. But when people are talking about large language models today, they're not usually talking about optimization. It's usually, again, generating language, generating images, content, and so on and so forth. Have we missed out? Because clearly deep learning technologies are being used very successfully. Why haven't we seen more in that intersection of machine learning and optimization?
Great question. So I guess loosely you might argue that machine learning or neural networks, large language models, are what are called sub-symbolic AI. They're good at sort of extracting insights from the world. Symbolic AI, reasoning, optimization are technologies that are better at making decisions. I think that AlphaGo, the original technology, was a combination of both neural networks and optimization. I think that now it's moved to neural networks. But the point here is that human beings, our brains are statistical mechanisms, and we're not necessarily very good at complex logical reasoning. And so I think that what was quite special about what DeepMind did was to get a neural network to beat human beings at things that we're actually still quite good at, like these games. But you wouldn't use a neural network to go and solve a vehicle routing problem. That said, over the next 3 or 4 years, what we might end up having a situation where we have neural networks creating algorithms that solve the vehicle routing problem or the staff allocation problem. So we'll use neural networks to come up with new algorithms for optimization. But neural networks are not the right technology to solve optimization problems directly. So this is an exciting, I guess, 5 years ahead. At the moment, I argue that large language models are a little bit like intoxicated graduates. And over the next year or so, we might see them graduate to being like a master's level. So being able to reason, and reasoning, by the way, will be a step change in their intelligence. I think that there's already been sort of a soft announcement that GPT-5 is going to be PhD level. And my expectation is in the next few years, we'll have systems that will be able to give complex problems to, and it will work out how to solve them. It might not necessarily solve it itself in its own brain, but it might create algorithms and systems to go and solve that problem, like somebody that has PhD level capability. And it's predicted that potentially by the end of this decade, we'll have a professor in our pocket that will actually be going out there, exploring its own hypotheses, its own bounds of humanity. And I think beyond that point, we don't really know what's going to happen.
I'm glad to hear that it has progressed beyond, well, I used to describe it as high school valedictorian. That it has moved up to the level of intoxicated university student. But I am, as a person with a PhD and married to another person with a PhD and know the difficulties of getting to any form of decision between the two of us, I'm slightly worried about analogies of this to a PhD level person. Delving into this a bit more as to what folks could do right now, it sounds like we should still be using our optimizational techniques that we currently use, mixed integer programming techniques, and so on and so forth. But presumably, there's still an opportunity to make them more effective by giving them better machine learning based inputs. So we leverage machine learning models in order to make better forecasts of various assumptions that we're then putting into our optimization problems, I'm guessing. But as someone who's been tackling that problem for many years now, has it progressed beyond that? Is there a next generation of methods for going in and not solving optimization problems with machine learning and AI, but accelerating them, covering the challenges and inefficiencies there?
It's a great question. And just to go back to the PhD analogy, it is not a very good analogy. I guess when I think of PhDs, the way that they kind of break down a problem, set hypotheses, or in theory use a scientific method to test those hypotheses, it's more of a way of thinking rather than some sort of intelligence level. And I think that's what I'm trying to kind of articulate there with the kind of different levels. I need a better analogy. So I guess when it comes to optimization, so I would argue that, large language models still can't solve these large scale optimization problems, nor can machine learning. So what we've seen over the past, I think, 7 or 8 years is a lot of people get excited about data science, about data lakes and data science. And so they should. There's lots of insights in data lakes that could be used to ultimately make better decisions. But there has been an impulse over the past 7 years that by extracting insights from data using machine learning and giving those insights to human beings, that they are somehow better at making decisions. And the reality is that they tend not to make better decisions. So if I, for example, used machine learning to understand my workforce's skills, their relationships, what skills development that they want to work on, if I still have the human planner, if I have the human still trying to then allocate those people to work, solving that complex optimization problem, then I'm missing a trick. So I would always start out with solve the decision-making problem using an algorithm, probably optimization algorithms, and then work out what data can you then give to that algorithm to allow it to make better decisions. And that's where machine learning and generative AI is helpful. So solve the optimization problem first. Use machine learning to extract skills and hopes, dreams, desires from your data set to give to the optimization engine. I guess what we're seeing at the moment is this interesting paradigm where instead of using machine learning to extract specific things from our data set, like skills or learning development needs or whatever, you can actually feed all of that data into a large language model and have the large language model sort of represent that person. So you can ask the large language model of the digital you, what skills do you need to develop? What skills do you currently have? Will you work well in this team? So you can actually use the large language model as a machine learning engine to extract insights from. And I think the reality is you need to use both a combination of large language models and machine learning, but ultimately you want to use those technologies to extract insights, and you want to give those insights to optimization algorithms and able to make better decisions.
Well, there are a lot of things in what you just said there. I guess the first one that struck me was the fallacy that insights are enough. If you are giving machine learning based insights to a human based decision maker, it often, well, if you're lucky, it gets taken into account and you have a one off improvement. But really, the opportunity here is in that movement from what I describe as insights to products. So, what is the thing which is on an ongoing basis making those decisions? And there, you might want to have humans be involved in assessing and validating the inputs, but you also want machine learning based inputs. And you would like to have humans also be very much involved in assessing the outputs of this and the implementation of and validation of what has been created. But it does require a rethinking about how you are leveraging these quote unquote insights. If it's not part of an automated ongoing process, you're probably not going to get the value from it.
Exactly. And then maybe also just kind of go one layer down is that there is this impulse that, by getting all of our data together and getting machine learning to pull insights from it, it will solve all of the problems in our business. I think we've already articulated that you need to solve the decision-making problem first, but data is hugely valuable, and getting it and making it available to these algorithms is of course imperative. But I typically always go to human beings that are already solving this problem. When I'm going down there going to apply AI to solving a problem, typically there's a human being already solving it. And I would go and ask them, what data sets do you use to make your decision? And I always start there, and rather than creating a data lake and hoping that you're going to find the needle in the haystack. And actually, I would even go one step beyond that, which is one might argue that technology is not necessarily a differentiator. Differentiator is AI experts are able to build these technologies, but also data. If you've got data that contains insights that are differentiated from your competitors, I would argue that that's really what organizations should be unlocking.
I've always been uncomfortable with the phrase, it's all about the data, or garbage in, garbage out. Just because you have data doesn't mean that you can actually use it for anything. It's more about the usage of the data and the alignment of your data to those specific, to the outcomes that you're trying to drive with it. So yes, absolutely, the data is extraordinarily important and a major source of differentiation for what you can do on the AI and machine learning side of things, but not just because you have it. Putting it into a data lake, even putting data governance and data quality initiatives around it. If you have not mapped it out to what the actual end use case is, you've likely built something which is not going to be aligned with what you need to drive value. It's a nuanced story. It's not what people want to hear when they just want to buy a platform.
Yeah, it sounds really boring, isn't it? Like list your frictions, your pain points, create a big backlog of them, and then figure out which ones are you going to then solve or leave to a third party to solve, and then work backwards. Like, how are you going to solve that algorithmically? What insights do you need to be able to solve it well, and what data is going to contain the insights? And solve those individual pain points over time, but build your AI, your data infrastructure over time. I wouldn't necessarily argue that you should start with a big kind of data transformation. I do think the data and these platforms are incredibly important, but it sounds like a cliche, but always make sure that you're driving value as you're building out those solutions.
This also sort of applies to the methods themselves. I mean, everybody is really excited about large language models, and there's a giant jump to them. And there have been impressive things that folks are doing with them. But there's also this giant catalog of existing machine learning use cases that almost no organization has gone after systematically and exploited. I guess I'm curious, when the teams that you're seeing today and maybe like for the next 6 months, where are they likely to get that value from? Is it already the case that the large language models are becoming the most important value driver because there are potentially high risk but very high rewards with it? Or is this still one where for the foreseeable future, probably 50%, 80% of the success that we're getting out of AI is coming from traditional machine learning based, non-LLM based use cases? Do you have a sense of where that threshold lies right now?
Yeah, I guess broadly there are three aspects of a business that we can apply AI to. The first aspect is kind of core productivity. So we're seeing, Copilot and Duet and, these AIs being introduced to our tools like Adobe and PowerPoint and whatnot. They're essentially improving core productivity. Everybody will access, those benefits, those productivity improvements. The second aspect is, where can AI be applied to solving problems across my supply chain and differentiate me from my competitors? Now, this is where it's a little bit more nuanced, but if you are trying to solve a problem that is ultimately a decision-making problem, and you've got a human being making that decision-making problem, and you expect by using large language models or machine learning to drive value, I would argue you're probably going to not see the return on investment. So if it's a decision-making problem, focus on using optimization to solve that problem. And that's where I see actually the biggest win. And then work backwards, then think about how you can use machine learning and generative AI to make the optimization engines work harder. If you already have an optimization solution in place, like, you've already got a vehicle routing solution in place or a workforce allocation solution in place, or in our case, a media allocation solution, so pushing media across channels, then you can work on how do we make the algorithm work harder by giving it better insights. So I would typically always automate the decision-making problem if it's not already automated. If it is already automated, then that's where machine learning and large language models could probably allow it to operate more effectively. I guess, sorry, just one thing. So the first part is core productivity. The second part is accelerating the digital transformation of your current business model. And the third part, and this is really important to our industry, is how and will AI completely disrupt the industry? And we can accelerate and enhance our current transformation, but ultimately, you're then susceptible to a completely different solution that will completely take away your market. So Mark Reed, the CEO of the BBP, has tasked myself and Stefan and Doris, the CTO, to figure out how do we completely disrupt not just the BBP but disrupt the entire industry. There are industries like media marketing communications that are ripe for disruption. Other industries probably more immune, like grocery, retail, where you have to move goods around. But that you do need to ask yourself that question: can I be disrupted by AI?
Yes, I was at an event with Sir Martin Sorrell just a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about how this can be almost an existential threat for the traditional agency model because so many organizations are based around charging for human time, and how do you make that switch? Another thing that he was very optimistic about was large language models as great enablers of mass personalization, that now you can get messaging that is extraordinarily targeted to you individually at incredible scale. But the thing that struck me about that comment was, well, if everybody can do that very easily, is this a enabler or does this destroy the entire market? Because now I'm being bombarded with extraordinarily personalized marketing from everybody, and so now I will shut off and not pay attention to any of it. Is there a long-term risk on both sides?
No, so I think about this every day, and something that the WPP has been facing into many years. So first of all, I would, whilst it is possible for AI to do mass personalization, if you think about the ads, the experiences, the brands that you've engaged with that are memorable, those are not necessarily been hyper personalized to you. They've been shared moments amongst communities, and I think that the challenge is how do you use the power of creativity to tap into the things that human beings value, like connectedness, like shared experiences, like feeling like we are learning something or contributing somehow to society. So faster, better, cheaper, that's easy. How do we enhance and have brands kind of engage with the other things that we value as human beings? And that requires creativity. So we expect over the years to be able to completely optimize the end-to-end marketing function. And the BBP aim to be the world's leaders in providing that technology, that capability. We have a platform that we call the BBP Open, which solves end-to-end marketing that is now being used by some of the biggest brands in the world. And the question you ask yourself is, well, if everybody has access to that technology, what's the differentiator? And as far as I'm concerned, the differentiator is human creativity. It's using human beings to come up with crazy ideas that differentiate your brand from other brands. And that's actually what I'm really excited about. I joined WPP 3 years ago because I genuinely believe their purpose. Their purpose is to use the power of creativity to make a better future. I think that humans are incredibly creative. I think we have the ability to use AI to enhance, to accelerate human creativity. And that's what really I'm excited about over the next decade.
Oh, wonderful. I'm reminded of the example of Apple, how people were using Apple as an example of being customer oriented and giving each customer exactly what they want, when it seemed to be the best example of the entire contrary. It was this was a wonderfully executed, extraordinarily focused, narrow experience, which was masterfully crafted back in the day, and extraordinarily innovative back in the day. It wasn't exactly not because it was going in and being all things to all people in all different ways. So it's so we've said it before, said it again, but humans aren't going anywhere anytime soon, and the human creativity part, very important.
Agreed. And actually, there's something really also important to think about here from a safe and responsible perspective. So there's a human bias that's called homophily. We as human beings tend to like to engage with people that sound and look like us. And if you let AI loose, say in marketing, to optimize that content to maximize engagement, you end up in a situation where you might have you selling to you. And I don't know whether that enforces biases or bigotry or social bubbles, but one of the interesting things that we have to ask ourselves now is in the world of AI, is not what happens when I deploy AI in terms of how it might go wrong. We've always developed software and we've mitigated the risks of software going wrong. We now have to ask ourselves, what happens if the AI goes very right? What harm can that cause? And homophily is one of those situations. And so I do think that we can hyper personalize, but I think that brands will be successful when they actually bring people together in common shared experiences.
You're making me think that we shouldn't be worried about when AI does things that we don't want. The bigger problem is when AI does exactly what we want it to do.
And we haven't thought about the consequences of that. In fact, actually, we've just launched a company, or at least we're just coming out of stealth that the BPP has invested in. That is, it's going to sound a bit crazy, but it's to understand machine consciousness. So we think that machine consciousness is going to be a very important concept to face into as a species over the next decades. Either we're going to be attributing consciousness to things that are not conscious, agents in games, or our personal assistants, etc. Or we might inadvertently be building machines that do have conscious behavioral markers, and we're not aware of it. And there's a concept that was coined by Nick Bostrom, who wrote Superintelligence, called mind crime. And in some respects, we have a duty of care not just to ourselves and other conscious beings like animals, but we potentially have a duty of care to AIs to not put them in traumatic or torturous situations, which is a science fiction question that actually we are now facing into over the next 10 years.
When I think of human beings, or I think of animals generally, I mean, we think about pain as being the manifestation of harm. We do not like to torture, and the torture is because it's either mental anguish and pain, or physical. What is the equivalent on a computer side? It's wasting cycles, wasting electricity. The concepts of boredom and pain don't really seem to be there in the same way. So how can you create harm to a model when the model can't experience those seemingly negative outcomes?
It's a great question, and the question is, could it feel things if we start to embody AIs in drones, in robots, in cars? If those agents became self-aware, and if they were in a situation where, let's say, I don't know, their tire popped or whatever, it mitigates their ability to achieve their goal, would it make them feel negative in some way? So it doesn't necessarily have to be pain, but if you are prevented from achieving some sort of goal, could it be problematic? The point is that nobody really knows how to answer these questions, and so we've managed to pull together, probably the world's leading advisory board to really lean into these questions. And one of the books I would highly recommend the audience is a book by a guy called Mark Solms, who's a world leading professor in neurosciences. It's a book called Hidden Spring, and I think it's one of the most seminal books on consciousness. Feeling, the ability to feel, either in a simulated scenario or a real scenario, is crucial to potentially what consciousness is.
Fascinating. I mean, I think for most of us lay people, when we think about conscious, we think about that voice in our heads that is providing that meta-analysis of everything that we're doing. It's very easy to envision that as just being a large language model that is that trained in a particular way, that is responding to the prompts that we are getting from all of our sensory inputs. So it's easy to think of our own consciousness as being a large language model, and which has its flaws. But it's easy to think about, well, I could create an electronic Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder to go in and say, well, observe what the things that I'm making and give me advice about, oh, by the way, you shouldn't say that because that, or you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't buy that, you shouldn't go in and write that because actually you're being very harmful to the other side and you might not realize it. So I guess it seems quite easy for me to envision how we could create a better AI conscious for us ourselves individually to go in and help us make less biased, self-damaging or harmful decisions and actions to others. I guess I see that as being much easier than going in and creating something for models. But I guess theoretically, if you had a multi-agent model where one of them is reacting to and providing guidance on, and is doing this trained on so that it is operating in an ethical fashion, then you are providing consciousness into the system of sorts. Is that the direction you're going in? Or there's lots of different directions you could.
There are plenty of different directions. There's two things here that I think are important. One is that you mentioned this concept of a voice in your head. And I didn't realize this until my 30s, but there are some people that don't actually have a voice in their head. So I didn't realize until my 30s that I actually have no inner monologue. And I assume that most of the listeners, I think 70% of the people listening to this will either have multiple voices in their head or a voice in the head that's kind of constantly chattering and narrating what's going on. And there are people, including myself, that don't have any voice. I've never had a voice. And so this concept of an inner monologue, or even potentially a consciousness, is a little bit alien to me. So that's one thing I would encourage the listeners to go and kind of Google not having an inner monologue. It's a real thing. And I think we need to acknowledge that there are people that think very, very, very differently to how each of us think. So that's the first thing.
Well, I think a lot of us would be extraordinarily envious of that. Not to mention that it sounds like almost a Buddhist ideal.
It does have its pros and cons. I used to teach a martial art called Shirinji Kempo many years ago, and part of that martial art was meditation. And I never really understood this concept of having to sort of quiet the sort of chattering voice that you have in your head. It never made any sense to me at all until later on in my 30s did I suddenly realize that there's this very common thing that happens in people's heads. On the one hand, I think it's a superpower. On the other hand, it has its own other problems as well, which is I don't know what I'm going to say until after I've said it, which is sometimes a problem. And anyway, that's probably a different conversation. But the other thing that you mentioned is that,
well, unfortunately, I think that a lot of folks with inner monologue, myself included, also are in that situation of we find out only afterwards what it was that we were going to say.
Indeed. Well, we could have an entire podcast on this very topic, but. There's the other thing you said is that we are going to start having these digital assistants. You already downloaded Pi, so with Inflection, you'll have this assistant on your phone that's learning, that's understanding your preferences, your hopes, your dreams, your desires, that could help you make better decisions, mitigate your biases. And I think, by the way, that's very exciting. Not just have a sort of a personal digital twin of me, but by the way, we're also building professional digital twins. We're building large language models that are trained on the digital footprint of people's email, their calendar, their feedback. So we can use that model for resource planning, which is why I've talked a lot about resource planning in today's podcast. But what's interesting from a marketing perspective is that we need to learn not just market to human beings, we need to learn to market to our digital twins. So we're going to need to figure out how do we sell to AIs, which I think is a completely new paradigm in this industry.
It will be an exciting world. Highlights even more the need for governance around this. I mean, both this, but also what you were saying earlier about the need to have automated decision-making systems. That is an extraordinarily scary thing to a lot of executives. What does the reality look like of providing that trust, of ensuring that safety? So effectively, the practice of governance of a system like that, is it really all the brass tacks that we would have around software? It is, well, you can have test it, go in and test it not just on prior data, go in and simulate potential negative or adverse situations and see what's happening there. Use the toolkit that exists within machine learning for validating machine learning models. Do the best practices of just even the basics of documenting what you're doing and providing data lineage and model lineage and making it such that other people can review your work and that it's reproducible. Is it all that, or are there other secrets to providing that governance?
I think there's a huge amount, obviously, that's been done in software to make sure that we're building safe systems. I know there's a lot of people, for example, that have rebranded themselves as AI ethicists. I would sort of controversially argue there's no such thing as AI ethics, because the difference between AIs and human beings is that human beings have intent, AIs don't have intent, and it's really intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. So I would argue there are really two questions you need to ask yourself when deploying AI safely and responsibly. One is, what happens if my AI not just goes wrong, but goes very right? I think that's a really important question we have to ask ourselves. But the difference really between AIs and software is that AIs typically are opaque in terms of their decision making, in terms of how they're making their predictions or suggestions or decisions. And so building explainable algorithms, I think, is crucial. If you can build explainable algorithms, then you can understand the kind of confidence level that an AI has in terms of its prediction or its decision. And it also makes things transparent, auditable, more governable. So explainability is really, I think, the crux of mitigating a lot of these kind of risks associated with software that is opaque in its decision making. And where you can identify, create a mechanism where you can determine the confidence level, where an AI is not confident in its ability to make a decision, that's where it's important to bring humans in the loop. So build humans in the loop, try to understand the confidence in the AI's prediction or decision making, and where there's a sort of a threshold of it not being confident, you bring the humans in.
And arguably, this is one of those superpowers of AI, is the fact that it can give us that information about our lack of confidence. Whereas in human beings, I think there's research that shows that it's particularly in the domains that we don't have, that we shouldn't have confidence, that we are overconfident. Would love to just ask a little bit about the chief AI officer role that you have. So many organizations are looking to have one. I think every branch of the US federal government now has a mandate that they have to create that kind of a role. And a lot of folks, they might not be aspiring for that title per se, but they're looking to be a core business leader in the organization who is driving the use of and adoption of AI and machine learning to drive digital transformation in the organization. Now, obviously, in your case, you have the perfect background for this, having come out and done your PhD on neural networks, no less, and been applying this to business problems for many, many years. How should folks come to this role, and what kind of a role should it be in your view?
I think different organizations need to consider whether it's important for them or not. I think if AI is going to potentially radically transform your business or your industry, then it's probably needed to have somebody like me that is looking at the bleeding edge technologies that are coming out of academia, that understand pragmatically where you should apply these technologies, what the battleground is, what we should be conceding to partners or startups that are coming along. So what's our AI strategy over the next 7 years? How do we think that these technologies will play out? And I think that having foundational understanding of these technologies and not just kind of rebranding yourself over the past 7 years is I think it's important to have that foundational knowledge. And of course, marketing media communications is ripe for disruption. So I've been very, very lucky to join WBP and have the influence that I have. It's been a wonderful acquisition, and I love my job. I think other organizations they don't necessarily need to have somebody like me if they are not being completely disrupted by AI. I think that between the CAO, the CTO, between them, they can have a kind of a level of knowledge and level of understanding to work with experts to make sure that they're deploying these technologies in the right way. So I think that there's there's an argument to have a sort of a partial or a fractional chief AI officer role for some industries. For others, I think you need somebody that's dedicated to it. And my job is not only just to kind of figure out how these technologies will transform this industry, but it's also to think about the ethical and responsible use of these technologies to really lead into some of these big questions and around how do we create content in a responsible way and make sure that we're not exploiting people's biases and things like that. So I think we're going to see more and more people in my role. I did a conference. I think it was the first ever Chief AI Officer Summit in Boston. I think it was earlier this year. At the time, the research showed that there's about 500 people that had sort of called themselves Chief AI Officers. I think the argument was about 250 of those sort of knew what they were doing, and about 25 really were sort of kind of highlighted as pushing the boundaries. And very fortunate that I made the cut. But I hope that more. Yeah.
I was amazed that 250 knew what they were doing. That's already sounds that's very impressive in my mind.
I might be being generous in my terminology there, but I think this is a really important role. This is not it's not hype. AI is going back to, I guess, your first question, which is is AI is generative AI overhyped? I don't think it is, but I think that there is a misinvestment, like there was in machine learning, like there was in data lake 7 years ago, where companies think that they can do this themselves. They think they can hire AI experts, build AI technologies, and then somehow retain and support talent. And I would ask organizations to be honest with themselves. Have you built software internally that you've scaled and supported that work inside your organization? And if you haven't done that, you probably won't be able to do with AI.
So it sounds like there's this glorious parallel between assessing a machine learning or AI solution and the CAO role. You have to be very clear about what the business value is, what you're hoping to achieve, your ability to implement it and develop it, operationalize it, and maintain it. And the same holds true to a certain extent for the CIO role. Getting clarity on what it is that you're hoping to achieve and being very clear as to how that role will be able to drive that outcome in your organization is probably something you should think long and hard about if and when creating that role.
But actually, just to kind of just summarize maybe some of the things that I've mentioned, which I think that ultimately there are three important sort of differentiators for an organization. The first is data. If you have data that contains signals that's better than your competitors, then it's the data that makes AI smart. That's the first differentiator. The second differentiator is AI talent. And the reality is that I think there's only really a small number of companies in the world that really can attract a super top AI talent. Otherwise, you're going to have to work with third parties, with partners and other vendors to bring that capability in-house. So do you have access in any way to bleeding edge AI talent? And the third is leadership. If you are not bought into the transformational power of AI and understand pragmatically where these technologies can and can't be used, then you're wasting your time. So those are the three things I look for: data, talent, and leadership.
Absolutely. Although if I had to choose between one of the three of those, I would go for the leadership one, because with great leadership, you can attract that talent, you can enable that talent, and hopefully you would be able to, over time, with enough patience, be able to build that differentiated data that would drive it. But unfortunately, the leadership one, I think it's too frequently overlooked. Daniel, thank you very, very much for your time. If folks want to find out more, I'm imagining go see your various TEDx talks, reach out to you on LinkedIn. But if they also want to find out more about your new startup and about AI consciousness generally, where should they go?
Yeah, Consium.com, CONSCIUM.com. There's a podcast out there by the London Futurist as well. And but yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, email me, daniel@satalia.com or daniel.hume@wpp.com. Very happy to keep the conversation going.
And best of luck with that startup. You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.